All right, so hi, welcome to the Research Support Workshop Series. I'm Dr. Darby Proctor. I'm Assistant Professor in Psychology, and today we're going to talk about writing grants during your undergraduate studies. So to give you a little overview of what I'm going to talk about, a little bit of background on why it would be worth it for you to apply for a grant as an undergrad, a little bit of information about finding a mentor because science is not an individual process, and then we'll go through an example grant that undergrads are eligible for through Sigma Xi, and we'll go specifically over that application and then wrap up with any questions that you might have. All right, so why apply for a grant? Well, the biggest reason probably is to guide your own learning experience. People learn better when they do things rather than if they're just sitting and passively watching or passively learning. So if you get involved with research, you're going to learn a lot more about whatever the topic is that you are researching. Because of that active participation in the process, you're going to learn a lot better. So if there's some topic that you are really passionate about, the best way to learn about it is to get involved in doing that subject. Now, that's sort of the hopeful theoretical reason why you should want to apply for a grant. Some of the more practical reasons are for your professional development. So, of course, if you are interested in going on to grad school, or if you're interested in doing research in the future, doing research now as an undergrad is a great way to develop some of those research skills that will make you more marketable for things like graduate school or even for getting into someone else's research lab during your undergrad career. The other reason to do an undergraduate grant is so that you get to work with an active scientist as a mentor. You are not yet qualified to do independent research. That's okay. That's why faculty members like to get undergrads in our lab, and if you get a grant, this is a great chance for you to get a lot of one-on-one time with a faculty member who knows a whole lot about the research that you're going to be doing. And that's a relationship that can be really important, not just while you have the grant, but also in the future, because this is the person who can write you a really, really good letter to get into grad school, because they have worked with you, they know your skill set, and having that personal connection with them lets them write a more high-quality letter for you. And then, of course, if you're interested in graduate school, this can be a really big advantage. There are very, very few undergraduates who get grants. If you get a grant as an undergraduate, your chances of getting into grad school are going to skyrocket. I couldn't find any actual stats on that, but the average acceptance rates, depending on the field and the quality of the institution you go to, are somewhere between 2 and 20% to get into graduate school. So it's quite competitive. And so getting a grant or even just applying for a grant as an undergrad and putting that on your CV for graduate school is going to make you a lot more competitive. Okay, so these are some of the reasons that you should want to apply for a grant as an undergrad. The next thing that you need to do, if you've decided that you're interested in applying for a grant, is find a mentor. So I already mentioned that this person is very important for helping you through the process of whatever research you're doing, but having that good mentor is in a way more important than the project itself. The project doesn't work, that's okay. That person is still going to have that relationship with you and be able to help you in the future. So when you're trying to find a mentor, one of the things that you should be thinking about is how you can make it worth that person's time to invest in you, because it does take quite a bit of an investment by the faculty to help you through the grant process, and then to help you, if you get the grant, through that research project. So what you can do for your mentors is offer to help out in their lab, maybe share resources with them if you do get this grant, so that they're getting something back for their investment in you. When you want to find a mentor, the biggest thing that you need to do is find someone who has the same research interests as you do. If you are interested in some topic in biology, don't find a psychology research mentor. They aren't going to be the person that can guide you the best. So find someone who's doing research that you find really exciting and really compelling, because if you apply for a grant and hopefully get a grant through them, you'll be learning a whole lot about that topic. So make sure those research interests overlap. So how do you actually find that person? Well, it's great if you already have an existing relationship with them. So if you've had faculty members as instructors in your courses and they know you and you think their research is really interesting, that would be a great person to go and talk to about helping you apply for an undergraduate grant. Now, sometimes you as an undergraduate can't be too picky, but it would also be great if whoever you're approaching also has some sort of past history of undergraduate mentorship. And that can be a little bit hard to find out, but have a look at that person's lab. Do they have undergraduates working in their lab? If so, they're okay with mentoring undergraduates. Then the other thing you can do if you haven't found that faculty member that you're interested in working with through your classes is check out the faculty profiles that we have on the Florida Tech website. The search function is not super amazing on those profiles, but if you use sort of broad enough keywords, you can narrow in. So do check those out. And then of course you can search around the Florida Tech website and other places. There are links to research centers, and you might be able to figure out who's working in those research centers and then search for those people's profile to get a better sense of who you'd like to work with. All right, now if you find a mentor, that is great. And you have some responsibilities if someone agrees to mentor you, and that is to be a good mentee. So if you're going to go through this process, you need to realize that you're going to have to do quite a bit of work. And some of the things that you always need to do is whenever you have a meeting with your mentor, you need to come prepared with things like new improved drafts of your proposal or your grant application. The faculty member is not going to do that for you. You need to be the person who is instigating all that work. You need to work hard and stay enthusiastic about the project. Science almost never goes the way you think it will, so you need to be okay with some frustrations and figure out how to stay positive about the project. And along with that, you need to keep in regular contact with your mentor. Depending on your field, you might be working directly with your mentor, or you might not. You might be working at a different time than them, so you need to keep them updated on what's going on with your research project. You have to do a lot of outside research on this topic. Now, your mentor can certainly guide you to get you started about how to do that research, but it's on you to go ahead and do a lot of reading in this research area and to come up with connections that you might need to write the proposal and to do that research. And throughout all of this, one of the things that I've hopefully referenced is that you need to communicate well with your mentor. So if your mentor likes to email you, respond to them in a very timely manner so that they can stay up to date, then they can also provide you with good feedback. And then you also need to be respectful of your mentor's time and their own agenda. Getting undergraduate grants is important to faculty members, but it's probably not the most important thing that they have going on. So you have to be respectful of their time and their investment in you, because it is an investment in you if a faculty member agrees to mentor you through this process. So there aren't a ton of places for undergraduates to get grants. Some possibilities are things like honor societies in your particular field. So I'm in psychology. Psychi, the International Honor Society in Psychology, has some undergraduate grants. So look through the honor society in your field and see what they offer. There might also be other organizations in your field that offer undergraduate grants. So again, in psychology, the American Psychological Association offers some undergraduate grants. So look through those places to figure out if you're eligible and what types of research they might cover. But really today what I want to talk about is a grant that is available to undergrads, and it's open to all scientific disciplines. And you don't have to be American to get this. It is open to everyone in the world, regardless of nationality. So if you're an international student, you are definitely eligible for this. In contrast, you might not be eligible for an American Psychological Association grant, of course, because it's focused on Americans. But Sigma Xi is international, so you can be any nationality and in any scientific discipline, and they do include engineering as one of those scientific disciplines. Now, the undergraduate grants tend to be quite low dollar, but that's okay because getting a grant is awesome no matter how small it is. So the Sigma Xi grants are generally only up to $1,000, although they have some random funding from the US government to pay up to $5,000 for astronomy-related projects. Now, about 75% of the grants that they give out go to Sigma Xi members. So, if you can find one of your faculty members who is a Sigma Xi member, that will give you an advantage. And there are several that I know of faculty members at Florida Tech who are Sigma Xi members. Now, 75% of the grants go to Sigma Xi members. You can also become a student member if a faculty member will mentor you to get membership in this organization. But there still is that chance 25% of the grants are going to people who are not Sigma Xi members. So even if you can't find a faculty member whose research interests you're interested in and is a Sigma Xi member, you still have a shot to get this grant. The grant covers funding for both travel and equipment, but there are some restrictions on what that funding can cover, and that's pretty standard for all grants. They always have restrictions about what they can cover. So for Sigma Xi, they like to cover any sort of specific equipment necessary for you to undertake that research project, but not things that would generally already be in a research lab. So they're not going to cover things like a computer because you already have one and your faculty mentor already has access to computers. So it would have to be some sort of specific thing that you need that's really just for this particular research project. They'll also pay for travel to and from a research site. So if you're doing your research in Orlando, not in Melbourne, they will reimburse you for the gas that you're spending. So you can put that into a grant. And then finally, if you're in psychology, they will also let you pay for human participants. So we often give humans a small money amount if they come and participate in psychology studies. So that is also a perfectly fine funding expense. Now, things that they do not fund are travel to scientific meetings. So if you want to go to a conference, they're not going to fund that. They don't fund any sort of your educational costs. So they won't pay for tuition, they won't pay for books. As I said earlier, they won't pay for supplies and equipment that should be standardly available in whatever lab you're working in. So if you're working in a biology lab, they're not going to pay for petri dishes. You should already have access to that. They won't pay any salary for you. And they won't pay any manuscript preparation or publication costs, although that's something you could probably work out with your faculty mentor. And then things that you probably are not even aware of are things like indirect costs or institutional fees. Just don't even worry about that because they don't pay for them. And then you can get up to 2 of these particular grants offered by Sigma Xi, but you cannot get a third. Okay, so let's talk more specifically about this particular grant. They're called Grant in Aid of Research. They have yearly submissions on October 1st and March 15th, so we just missed the October 1st deadline, but that's okay because you need to start early to do any sort of grant proposal. So the proposal for this grant is very brief. There is a proposed investigation section that is only 500 words, so that means it has to be extremely concise. Then you have to include a budget, which is itemized, and you have to have a letter of reference from your research mentor. So again, it's a good idea to find a mentor who you already have some relationship with so that they can write you a good letter for this grant. So what we'll do now is go over each one of these different sections of this particular grant proposal. So in the proposed investigation section, you need a few different components. So you need a brief background section where you set up the problem or issue that you have, and you need to justify why your research is needed, right? You have to have a good scientific reason for why you're doing this, otherwise it's not going to be funded. And then you need to include some sort of comment about how this study relates to the big picture in your field. If you find what you think you'll find, how does that help us in science? How does that help expand the field? So these things are incredibly brief, only 500 words. I was able to find an example of a funded application online, but only one, and it's a number of years old, and I'll show you the link to that later. But here is essentially the background section of that proposal. So as you can see, it's only 2 paragraphs long. The first paragraph really sets up the problem. In this case, they're talking about some insect species, and they're basically saying, here's how insects behave as larvae. Here's a couple of theories about why they behave in these certain ways. And then the second paragraph is mixing a little bit of methods with the background, but is still giving you some information about what exactly the behavior of these particular insects is, and then it goes straight into setting up what this particular research will test, what they are going to experimentally manipulate. So again, you can see this is very brief as a background section, only a couple of paragraphs because you only have those 500 words to work with, and you still have to cover the other sections in the proposal. So the next section after the background is your method section. And this is basically how you're going to do the study. Be sure to give this enough space. One of the things that Sigma Xi points out on their website is that people often spend way too much space on the background section and not enough space on the methods, because if Sigma Xi can't figure out how you're going to test this, they're not going to fund it. So you need to be sure to leave enough space to talk about your methods. But again, you still need to be really concise because you still only have those 500 words. So here, again, this is the next section of the same proposal I showed you earlier. It goes into more specifically how they are going to do this. So about halfway down in that first paragraph, they're saying, I'm going to use this plastic fence to encircle individual plants. I'm going to place larvae in there in different size cohorts. Then weekly, I'm going to take a consensus of all of those so that you can determine the effect of predation in these different size cohorts, right? So this is a pretty simple experimental design, but the person here has gone through quite clearly and said exactly what they're going to do and exactly how they're going to collect this data. And then they end, and this is very important, this is what undergrads often miss, is they end with a brief statement about how this fits into the bigger picture of science. So they say, the study proposed here will differentiate between these hypotheses. I'll be able to determine whether these hypotheses either individually or simultaneously explain this behavior. Detailed studies of this type are required to understand the evolution of this complex behavior, right? So they're really telling you how this specific thing that they're doing relates to the broader field of insect behavior. And that is a really important statement because the people reading your proposals are not necessarily experts in the field that you are doing research in. So even though it might seem obvious to you why this research is important or how it fits into the big picture, it might not be obvious at all to the person reading that grant. So that final wrap-up statement is really essential in writing these types of proposals. So the next section that you will need, and now this does not count for the word limit anymore, so you have to do the background and the methods and that big picture statement in 500 words. Then you also have to write a budget, but it is not counted in those 500 words. The budget needs to be itemized, so you need to list each item that you are requesting money for and how much each item costs. And you need to make sure that those items are obviously related to your methods, right? So for the example we just went through, the person would need to buy larvae, they would need to buy some of that fencing that they talked about, and those would be pretty obvious about why they were related to the study that they were doing. Now, sometimes you might need something that is not as obvious. If you're asking for something that the connection to it and your methodology are not as obvious, include a brief justification of why you need that item, and I'll show you an example of that in a minute. When you're writing your budget, remember to only ask for things that they will fund. If you ask for a computer, your application is going to get thrown out immediately because it's not one of their fundable expenses. So be sure to only ask for things that they will pay for. Now, these grants go up to $1,000. Ask for as much of that as you need, right? If you really need the full $1,000, ask for that. But don't be greedy, right? If you're adding padding sort of items just to get to that $1,000 limit, don't do that, because they'll be able to tell, right? These are scientists who've read many grants. Don't add stuff just to get to $1,000. Ask for what you need, and don't ask for more than what you need. So here's an example of something that you could include as a budget. So there's a column for the item and the description, the quantity of the item that they need, then the unit price, because sometimes you might need 2 of an item, and then they have the total price, and then at the bottom they have a total request. So you see in this particular example, they asked for $950 of the $1,000, right? They could have added random stuff to get to $1,000, but they don't need it, right? So again, ask for what you need, but don't ask for stuff that you don't need. Now, for this budget, these items on here were clearly related to the methodology that they were engaging in. I one time wrote a grant where some of my equipment requests were not as intuitive. So for example, at some point I needed 900 little Tupperware containers for an experiment that I was doing. And it was pretty obvious why I needed some containers, but it was not obvious why I needed so many. And in my case, I do research with non-human primates, and I was testing multiple primate species, and because we don't want any disease or illness transmission between species, we needed different sets of containers for each species. So because that wasn't necessarily obvious to someone who isn't in my field, I went ahead and added this little justification to the budget so that they would understand why I was asking for so many little Tupperware containers. The next component that you need is the reference letter. And again, start early on everything. You know, this is not something that you can do a week beforehand. You need to start a few months out to make sure that you can get all of this stuff done and that your research mentor has time to help you with it. So in your reference letter, this has to be from the research mentor. It's due the same grade as the grant, so don't wait till you submit it to tell your mentor that you have to have a letter from them. Give them enough time to write a good letter. One of the things that you can do to help your mentor write a good letter is to give them a copy of your CV when they're asking for it. That way they can talk about the other things that you've done, not just what they know about you. And then Sigma Xi is really helpful in this way because they actually provide a letter writer guide on how to write a good letter. So if you're applying for this grant and you're asking someone to write a letter, you might very well want to say, oh, by the way, this particular grant has some instructions for letter writers so that you can know exactly what type of information that they're looking for. And that's great for the faculty member because then we don't have to guess as much. All right, now, you may have read academic articles, or at least been exposed to them, and academic articles follow a sort of set pattern. It's this hourglass format where you start out writing about the broad scientific implications, and then you get more and more specific as you get into the end of your discussion and your methods section, and then you broaden back out as you get into your discussion section. Now, you haven't collected data yet, so you don't really have to worry about the second half of this, but generally your proposal should still follow this same type of structure as an academic article. You're just looking at sort of the first half of it. So you need a few sentences right at first at why is this important? Why should anyone keep reading this? You know, convince the proposal evaluators that this is something that is interesting. Then include some of that background research. Then that background research should sort of build the argument for your research, why it needs to be done. So go ahead and then state what you're hypothesizing and then how you're going to do it. Now, one thing that varies from the traditional academic article format is that at the end of this, again, you need to make one of those big picture statements. If your hypothesis is supported, what does that mean for science? Or what can we do as a field with the information that you're going to provide by doing this research? So be sure to include that statement, and I can't emphasize that enough because, again, the people reading this proposal are not necessarily experts in your particular field. You need to tell them why this is important and what it will mean if you find what you think you'll find. All right, as you go through the grant writing process, you are going to get a lot of feedback. Again, that's because you're pretty early in your scientific career, and you might not know some of just like the style conventions that scientists use when they're writing grants. So again, start early so your mentor can give you lots of feedback. And when you get feedback from your mentor, don't take it personally, right? We're trying to help and grow you as a scientist. We're not criticizing you as a person. Now, some mentors will give incredible amounts of feedback, and sometimes it's a little hard to read because you'll come back with a Word document and it's all read from all the changes they've made, but that's okay because the mentor is doing that so that you can learn. So don't take that personally, and do incorporate that feedback from a mentor. The mentor has more experience than you, and you should take their word that they know what they're talking about and incorporate that feedback with them. If you don't agree with that feedback, talk to them about it and then still incorporate it because they're probably right. You will likely go through several rounds of edits on something like a grant proposal, even though it's only 500 words. So again, you need to start early or you won't have time to get all of this edited. All right, I'm going to go ahead and skip this. These are just slides of the example proposal that I already presented to you. I just want to let you know that there are a couple more resources that you can use about submitting grants. In particular to the Sigma Xi grant, they actually have a video posted on their website about how to submit the best grant application you can for that specific grant. Here's also the link to the proposal that was funded that I used as an example in this presentation. And of course, our library has lots of resources for you. You can, of course, look through the library catalog, or you can come talk to your friendly librarians and they will help you with whatever they can. So I think we will pause for questions.
Same kind of format be applied to any grant proposal, really?
Typically, so the question was, will the same type of format be applied to any grant proposal? So sort of yes and sort of no. They all are looking for the same big components, right? They all want to know why this is important. They all need background information. They all need to know what you're going to do and how that fits into the big picture. But the specific requirements can be pretty variable. So one of my students applied for a Sci-Chi grant as an undergrad. She got it, which was awesome, but their requirements were a bit different. I think it was also only $1,000, but they had to write a 1,500 word application instead of a 500 word application. And then they also had to mask it, so they couldn't say Florida Tech or their name in it because they did blind review. So there are specific details of each grant that you will need to become familiar with and really read through, because some of them have really weird requirements that you wouldn't necessarily know and your mentor wouldn't necessarily know, right? I would have never read through the instructions on the Sci-Chi grant well enough to know that my student wasn't supposed to put her name on it, but fortunately she did, and so we submitted that correctly.
Do any of the grantors provide examples of successful grant applications?
Yeah, so again, it depends on the particular agency. Sigma Xi did not, although I did find some other college that provided an example, so that's where I got that from. I think Sci-Chi does. So again, you sort of have to go onto the websites for these grants and really dig through the resources that they have about that grant. They'll often have a guidelines page or how to do this the best way kinds of pages, and you might be able to find example grants there. It's by no means guaranteed though.
And you mentioned the mentors providing feedback, but if unfortunately your application does not succeed, can you get feedback from them?
Yeah, so what I've found is that if you submit an application and it does not get funded, at the undergraduate level, you typically do not get feedback about that. Most likely because there's too many people applying for them and you can't give feedback on every grant. So typically as an undergrad, you won't get any feedback from the granting agency, whether you get it or not, right? If you get it, all they say is, here's the money. Now you might have to write some sort of report for them after you finish the project or something like that. But again, you typically get very little feedback from the granting agencies as undergraduates. All right, so should you guys want to contact me, email is the best way to get a hold of me, which is displayed here. And feel free to email me with any sorts of undergraduate research grants questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.